Deep within the dense and mist-covered forests of the North American continent lies a mystery that has haunted the human imagination for centuries. It is a presence that is felt before it is seen, a heavy silence that descends upon the woods when the birds stop singing and the wind ceases to rustle the leaves. This is not merely a story of a biological anomaly, but a narrative of primal fear that transcends the boundaries of modern science and touches upon the ancient dread of the unknown. Countless individuals, from seasoned frontiersmen to modern-day hikers, have reported encounters with a towering bipedal figure that moves with a terrifying grace through the harshest terrains on Earth. The legends of the Sasquatch, or Bigfoot, are woven into the very fabric of the wilderness, serving as a grim reminder that humanity does not truly rule the wild places of the world. These stories are often dismissed as folklore, yet the consistency of the details and the palpable terror in the eyes of the witnesses suggest something far more tangible and menacing exists in the shadows. The indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest have spoken of the Sasquatch for thousands of years, describing these beings not as animals, but as a separate tribe of people who coexist with humanity, but choose to remain hidden. The name itself derives from the Halkomlim word Saskats, referring to a race of wild men who inhabit the high mountains and deep valleys where humans rarely venture. These oral traditions are not simple campfire tales intended to frighten children, but are cautionary histories passed down through generations to ensure survival. Elders speak of the boss of the woods, a powerful entity that demands respect and can unleash terrible retribution upon those who disrespect the natural order. In these ancient accounts, the creature is often depicted as possessing supernatural abilities, such as the power to paralyze a man with a scream, or to vanish into thin air, leaving only footprints as evidence of its passage. This spiritual connection adds a layer of complexity to the phenomenon, suggesting that the creature walks the line between the physical world and the spirit realm. One of the most chilling and historically significant accounts comes from the journals of Theodore Roosevelt, the 26th President of the United States. Before his presidency, Roosevelt was an avid outdoorsman and hunter who spent considerable time in the untamed frontiers of the American West. In his book, The Wilderness Hunter, published in the year 1893, he recounts a terrifying story told to him by a seasoned trapper named Bauman. The incident occurred in the chaotic and rugged landscape of the Bitterroot Mountains, dividing Idaho and Montana. Bauman and his partner had ventured into a particularly isolated and gloomy pass to trap beaver, unaware that they were entering the territory of something that did not welcome intruders. The atmosphere in the valley was oppressive, described by Bauman as holding a stillness that felt unnatural and heavy. It was here, among the towering pines and dark ravines, that the two men would face a nightmare that would leave one of them dead and the other forever scarred by the memory of what lurked in the darkness. Upon returning to their campsite, after a long day of setting traps, Bauman and his companion found their temporary home in a state of disarray. Their lean-to shelter had been torn apart, and their belongings were scattered across the forest floor, as if a tornado had touched down in the small clearing. However, nothing had been stolen, excluding the possibility of human thieves or curious bears looking for food. Bauman noted deeply pressed footprints in the soft earth surrounding the camp, footprints that looked human in shape, but were massive in size, far larger than any man he had ever seen. The two seasoned woodsmen felt a sudden chill run down their spines as they realized they were being watched by something intelligent and malicious. They rebuilt their shelter in silence, constantly scanning the dark tree line for movement, but saw nothing. As night fell, the forest seemed to close in around them, and the crackling of the fire offered little comfort against the encroaching shadows. That night, Bauman was awakened by a heavy noise outside the lean, followed by the distinct smell of a musk that was both pungent and wild. He saw a massive shadow looming against the starlit sky, a silhouette that blocked out the constellations and seemed to absorb the faint light. He fired his rifle into the darkness, and the shape retreated with a speed that defied its immense size, crashing through the underbrush like a runaway freight train. Sleep was impossible for the remainder of the night, as the men huddled together, weapons drawn, listening to the sounds of breaking branches circling their position. The creature was toying with them, testing their defenses, and instilling a psychological terror that was as potent as any physical attack. The next day, they decided to leave the valley. But first, they needed to check their traps one last time, a decision that would prove fatal. Bauman went one way, and his partner went the other, agreeing to meet back at the camp before noon. When Bauman returned to the campsite, the silence was deafening. The fire had burned down to cold ash, and his partner's pack lay, untouched, on the ground. Bauman called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls, but there was no response. Following the tracks, he found his friend's body, slumped against a fallen spruce tree. The man had been killed with a singular brutal force, his neck broken, and his throat torn out by savage teeth. There were no claw marks on the body, only 4 deep indentations on the neck that matched the spacing of a massive human hand. Beside the body, in the soft mud, were the same gigantic footprints they had seen the day before. Bauman fled the valley, leaving his gear and the furs behind, driven by a primal panic that consumed his every thought. He never returned to the Bitterroot Mountains, and the story he told Roosevelt remains one of the most credible and disturbing accounts of a violent encounter with with a Sasquatch. Moving forward to the summer of 1924, a group of miners in Washington state experienced a siege that would become known as the Battle of Ape Canyon. Fred Beck and 4 other prospectors had been working a gold claim on the east side of Mount St. Helens, a region known for its rugged terrain and deep lava tubes. Throughout their stay, they had heard strange whistling sounds and thumping noises in the woods, which they initially attributed to other prospectors or wild animals. One afternoon, while fetching water from a spring beck, saw a large hairy figure peering at him from behind a tree. In a panic, he fired his rifle, and the creature fell into the ravine below. This act of aggression seemingly triggered a retaliation that the men could never have anticipated. As night fell on their small log cabin, the miners found themselves under attack by a group of these creatures. The assault on the cabin began with a barrage of heavy rocks that pounded against the walls and roof, sounding like artillery fire in the quiet night. The cabin was built of sturdy logs, but the force of the blows shook the structure to its foundation. The miners huddled inside, gripping their rifles, as the creatures screamed and howled outside, displaying a rage that was terrifyingly human. At one point, a hairy arm reached through a gap in the logs, attempting to grab an axe that lay near the wall. One of the miners struck the arm with a piece of firewood, and the creature recoiled with a shriek of pain. For hours, the men were trapped in a nightmare, fighting off an enemy they could barely see in the darkness. The creatures climbed onto the roof, trying to break through the chimney, and the miners fired their weapons through the ceiling, hoping to drive them away. When dawn finally broke, the attack ceased, and the creatures retreated into the misty forest, leaving the cabin battered and the surrounding ground littered with large stones. The miners emerged from their fortress shaken and exhausted, finding gigantic footprints all around the site. They packed their equipment and abandoned the mine, immediately vowing never to return to that cursed place. The story of Ape Canyon was widely reported in the newspapers of the time, and despite skepticism from the authorities, the miners stuck to their story until their dying days. Fred Beck later wrote a book detailing the encounter, insisting that the beings were not merely animals, but had a supernatural quality to them, appearing and disappearing like ghosts. The area around Ape Canyon remains a hotspot for sightings to this day, and many hikers report an overwhelming feeling of dread when passing through the region. The dense forests of Northern California became the stage for the most famous piece of evidence in cryptozoology history. During the autumn of 1967, Roger Patterson and Robert Gimlin set out on horseback into the remote Bluff Creek area, explicitly looking for the creature. After seeing reports of massive footprints found by a road construction crew on the afternoon of October 20th, as they rounded a bend in the creek bed, their horses suddenly reared in panic, throwing Patterson to the ground. Standing by the water was a massive bipedal figure covered in dark hair, casually walking away from them. Patterson grabbed his cine camera and began filming while running toward the creature to get a better view. The resulting footage, lasting less than a minute, captured a creature that moved with a fluid, heavy gait that biomechanics experts have struggled to replicate for decades. The figure in the film, now known affectionately as Patty, turned her head to look at the men with a calm, almost dismissive expression before disappearing into the dense timber. The detail visible in the film, including the muscle movement under the fur and the clear definition of the creature being female, has baffled special effects artists and scientists alike. At the time, Hollywood suits for gorilla characters were stiff and unconvincing. Yet this figure displayed a natural physiology that seemed impossible to fake with 1967 technology. Bob Gimlin, a sturdy and honest cowboy, sat on his horse with his rifle drawn, ready to protect his friend, but chose not to fire. He later stated that the creature looked so human that he could not bring himself to shoot it, potentially committing murder. The encounter changed the lives of both men, subjecting them to decades of ridicule. Yet neither ever recanted their testimony. The eerie silence of the Sierra Nevada mountains was broken in the 1970s by a series of audio recordings that are perhaps more disturbing than any visual evidence. Ron Moorhead and a group of hunters established a camp in a remote area between Yosemite and Lake Tahoe, a place they referred to as the Sierra Camp. Over several years, they experienced repeated visits from a family of creatures that would vocalize in the darkness just beyond the light of their campfire. Unlike the animalistic grunts and howls usually associated with bears or mountain lions, these sounds were complex guttural and possessed a linguistic structure. The recordings, known as the Sierra sounds, capture a chatter that sounds like a primitive language with distinct whistle combinations and interactions between multiple voices. In one particularly harrowing recording, a voice that sounds incredibly large and powerful bellows, a scream that vibrates with such intensity it seems to distort the microphone. The men can be heard whispering in terror, trying to mimic the sounds in an attempt to communicate. The creatures would often bang on hollow logs with a rhythm that suggested intelligence and coordination. Moorhead described the experience not just as auditory, but physical feeling, the vibrations of the vocalizations in his chest. The creatures never attacked the men, but their presence was intimidating, a constant reminder that the hunters were merely guests in a territory owned by something else. Acoustical engineers who have analyzed the tapes state that the vocal range exceeds that of any known human singer or primate, suggesting a lung capacity and vocal tract size far larger than a normal man. Across the continent, in the swamplands of Fouke, Arkansas, a different kind of terror gripped a rural community in the early 1970s. The legend of Boggy Creek is based on a series of aggressive encounters with a creature described as 7 feet tall and covered in long, matted hair. The most famous incident involved the Ford family, who were terrorized in their home one night by a creature that seemed intent on entering. The family was gathered in their living room when they saw a hairy hand with claws smash through the window screen, trying to unlatch the door. Bobby Ford ran outside to confront the intruder and was reportedly grabbed and thrown to the ground, suffering scratches across his back. The creature was said to smell like the swamp, mixed with rotting flesh, a stench that lingered long after the creature had fled into the darkness. The Fouke Monster, as it came to be known, brought a level of violence that contradicted the shy giant image of the Pacific Northwest Sasquatch. Livestock in the area were found slaughtered often with their necks twisted or broken. Residents reported hearing high-pitched screams emanating from the bayous at night, causing hunting dogs to cower under porches. The local police constable was overwhelmed with calls from terrified citizens who refused to leave their homes after sundown. The geography of the area, with its dense cypress swamps and intricate waterways, provided the perfect hiding place for a predator, allowing it to move unseen and strike without warning. This southern variation of the creature is often associated with a more aggressive demeanor, perhaps, due to the harsher environment and competition for resources in the swamp. In the deep swamps of Florida, a similar creature known as the skunk ape has been part of local folklore for generations. Named for the unbearable odor that accompanies it, the skunk ape is smaller than its northern cousins, but no less terrifying. Sightings often occur in the Everglades, where the humidity hangs thick in the air and the sawgrass stretches for miles. In the year 2000, a series of photographs were mailed anonymously to the Sarasota County Sheriff's Department, showing a large ape-like creature hiding behind palmetto bushes. The creature in the photos had reddish-brown fur and glowing eyes that seemed to stare directly into the soul of the viewer. The letter accompanying the photos described the creature coming into the homeowner's backyard at night to steal apples from the porch, leaving behind a smell that made the residents physically ill. The psychological impact of these encounters is often more damaging than any physical harm. Witnesses frequently report a phenomenon known as infrasound, a low-frequency sound, wave that is below the range of human hearing, but can cause feelings of dread, nausea, and anxiety. Tigers are known to use infrasound to paralyze prey, and some researchers believe Sasquatch may utilize a similar biological mechanism. This would explain the irrational fear that grips experienced outdoorsmen moments before an encounter the sudden feeling that they must leave the area immediately or face certain death. This biological weaponization of fear suggests a predator that has evolved to dominate its environment, not just through strength, but through the manipulation of the nervous systems of its prey. Throughout the history of the United States, there have been thousands of reports of missing persons in national parks and forests. While most can be attributed to accidents or exposure, a disturbing subset of these cases involves disappearances that defy logical explanation. People vanish from trails within seconds of being out of sight of their companions, leaving behind no tracks and no scent for search dogs to follow. David Paulides, a former police detective, has chronicled these disappearances, noting strange clusters where people vanish in areas with a history of Bigfoot sightings. In some cases, children who are found alive days later tell stories of being carried off by a large, hairy bear man who fed them berries and kept them warm. These accounts add a confusing layer to the mystery, suggesting a creature that is capable of both extreme violence and strange acts of benevolence. The scientific community remains largely skeptical, demanding a body or DNA evidence before accepting the existence of such a creature. However, the sheer volume of eyewitness testimony from credible sources, including police officers, forest rangers, and military personnel, makes it difficult to dismiss the phenomenon entirely. The forests of North America are vast and largely unexplored, with millions of acres of wilderness where a population of intelligent hominids could easily remain hidden. They are masters of their environment, moving with a stealth that allows them to observe humanity without being detected. The lack of a body is often explained by the creature's intelligence and their possible practice of burying their dead, a behavior observed in early humans and Neanderthals. In the misty mountains of Tennessee, examining the folklore of the wildman reveals a history of encounters dating back to the early settlers. Families living in isolated cabins in the Great Smoky Mountains would often tell of the Boojum, a local name for the creature that would steal livestock and peer into windows at night. These stories were not told as entertainment, but as warnings to keep the doors barred and the livestock secured. The fear was real and tangible, passed down through generations of mountain folk who knew that the woods held secrets that were best left undisturbed. The consistency of the description, a tall, hairy, bipedal figure with glowing eyes, remains unchanged across centuries and cultures, reinforcing the idea that this is a single biological entity. One particularly eerie aspect of modern sightings is the association with strange lights and orb phenomena. In areas like the Chestnut Ridge in Pennsylvania, witnesses often report seeing glowing spheres of light floating in the woods shortly before or after after a Bigfoot encounter. This has led some researchers to speculate on a connection between the creature and UFO phenomena, a theory that moves the discussion from cryptozoology to the paranormal. While controversial, these reports suggest that the reality of the Sasquatch may be far stranger than a simple relict hominid. The idea that these creatures might have the ability to move between dimensions or utilize energy in ways we do not understand adds a layer of cosmic horror to the narrative. The emotional toll on witnesses is severe, often leading to post-traumatic stress disorder. Seeing something that is not supposed to exist shatters a person's worldview, forcing them to question their sanity and the nature of reality. Many witnesses keep their stories secret for decades, fearing ridicule and professional ruin. When they finally speak, the relief is palpable, but the fear remains. They often refuse to enter the woods again, abandoning hobbies like hunting and camping that once brought them joy. The woods are no longer a place of peace, but a domain of monsters where the rules of civilization do not apply. This lingering trauma is a testament to the power of the encounter, a scar on the psyche that never fully heals. Analyzing the famous Patterson Gimlin film with modern digital stabilization technology reveals details that were impossible to see in 1967. The muscle groups in the thigh and back can be seen contracting and relaxing with every step, a detail that a suit from that era could not mimic. The creature's gait shows a compliant knee walk, a way of moving that keeps the knees bent to absorb shock and maintain a low profile. This biomechanical efficiency is characteristic of a creature adapted to walking on uneven terrain. Skeptics argue it is a man in a suit, but no one has ever come forward with the suit or demonstrated a walk that matches the film perfectly. The film remains the holy grail of evidence, a haunting snippet of time that captured a ghost on celluloid. The concept of the uncanny valley plays a significant role in the terror induced by Bigfoot. The creature is close enough to human to be recognizable, but different enough to be monstrous. It stands on two legs. It has hands that can grasp and manipulate objects, and its face holds an intelligence that is unsettling. This distortion of the human form triggers a deep biological revulsion, a warning system in our brain that tells us we are looking at something wrong. It is a dark mirror, reflecting a primal version of ourselves, untamed and dangerous. This psychological reaction is hardwired into our DNA, a remnant of a time when we shared the earth with other hominid species that were competitors and predators. In the swamps of Louisiana, the Honey Island swamp monster is a legend that keeps locals out of the bayous after dark. Described as having gray hair and yellow eyes, this creature is said to leave 3-toed tracks, a distinct variation from the typical 5-toed prints found elsewhere. The swamp provides a labyrinth of waterways and dense vegetation, making it nearly impossible to track or corner a creature that knows the terrain. Fishermen tell stories of boats being rocked by massive unseen hands and strange screams that silence the crickets and frogs. The swamp itself is a character in these stories, a suffocating wet landscape that guards its secrets with jealousy. The story of the terrifying encounter at a remote cabin in Ontario, Canada, adds a northern dimension to the mystery. A group of teenagers staying at a lakeside cottage reported being watched by a massive creature standing on the dock at midnight. The moon reflected off the water, silhouetting a giant frame that stood perfectly still for minutes. When one of the teens shone a flashlight, the creature dove into the water with a splash that sounded like a car hitting the lake. They heard it swimming toward the shore with powerful strokes before it vanished into the boreal forest. The idea of a semi-aquatic Sasquatch capable of swimming great distances expands the range of the creature and the scope of the threat. Historical archives from newspapers in the 1800s are filled with reports of wild men and gorillas found in the American wilderness. These articles, written long before the term Bigfoot was coined, describe encounters that are identical to modern sightings. In 1869, the Antioch Ledger reported a gorilla attacking a man in California, wielding a club and fighting with human-like ferocity. These archival treasures prove that the phenomenon is not a modern invention or a product of pop culture, but a persistent reality of the American frontier. The terminology changes, but the description of the monster remains the terrifying same. The theory that Bigfoot is a surviving population of Gigantopithecus blacki, a giant ape that lived in Asia hundreds of thousands of years ago, provides a scientific framework for the creature. It is believed that these massive primates crossed the Bering Land Bridge alongside humans and settled in the vast forests of North America. If true, it means we are sharing our continent with a prehistoric relic, a living fossil that has survived against all odds. This biological reality is terrifying in its own right, implying a creature that has evolved alongside us, competing for resources and learning to avoid us to survive. It is the ultimate survivalist, a species that has mastered the art of invisibility. Hunters often report the feeling of being paced in the woods, hearing footsteps that mimic their own, stopping when they stop and moving when they move. This behavior suggests a creature that is curious but cautious, observing the intruder from a safe distance. The pacing often ends with a warning sign, such as a rock thrown or a tree knock, a loud wood on wood sound that echoes through the forest. These knocks are believed to be a form of communication, alerting other creatures to the presence of a human. To be the subject of such surveillance is a deeply unsettling experience, a realization that the hunter has become the hunted. The mystery of Bigfoot is not just about a monster in the woods. It is about the limits of our knowledge. We live in an age of satellite mapping and constant surveillance. Yet we cannot say with certainty what lives in our own backyard. The existence of Sasquatch represents the wild chaos that civilization tries to suppress, the dark unknown that lies just beyond the pavement. It is a reminder that the world is still full of secrets, and that there are things in the dark that do not care about our science or our skepticism. The stories will continue as long as there are forests to hide in, and people brave enough or foolish enough to enter them. As the sun sets over the vast canopy of the Pacific Northwest, the shadows lengthen, and the woods reclaim their ancient silence. The evidence remains circumstantial, the footprints cast in plaster, the grainy films, the audio recordings of mournful howls. Yet for those who have looked into the eyes of the creature, the proof is undeniable. They carry the weight of the encounter for the rest of their lives, haunted by the memory of a face that was both human and beast. The legend of Bigfoot endures because it touches a primal nerve, the fear of the wild, and the understanding that we are not the apex predators we believe ourselves to be. In the end, the question is not whether Bigfoot exists, but when we will be forced to confront the reality of its existence. Until that day, the creature remains a ghost story, a shadow in the trees, a rustle in the brush. It is the guardian of the wilderness, the watcher in the woods, waiting for the next intruder to cross into its domain. The forest is deep and the night is dark, and somewhere out there in the cold silence, something is breathing, watching and waiting. The dread lingers long after the story ends, a cold whisper on the back of the neck that says you are never truly alone in the wild. The forests of America hold their secrets tight, wrapping them in moss and shadow. Whether flesh and blood or spirit and shadow, the Sasquatch walks the line between our world and the nightmares of our ancestors. Every snapped twig, every unexplained howl, every feeling of being watched keeps the legend alive. It is a story written in footprints and whispered in fear, a testament to the enduring power of the unknown. Sleep well, but remember that the window to the wilderness is never truly closed, and the eyes that watch from the darkness never blink. So the next time you find yourself alone in the deep woods and the silence falls heavy around you, listen closely. Do not dismiss the snapping of a branch or the heavy thud of a footstep as the wind or a deer. It might be the wind, or it might be the boss of the woods, reminding you that you are a guest in his home. The line between myth and reality is thinner than the mist that clings to the mountains. And once you cross it, there is no turning back. The Sasquatch remains the ultimate ghost story, a haunting that breathes and walks and watches forever. The legend survives because the fear is real. It is a darkness that predates history, a shadow that stretches from the first campfires of humanity to the modern electric lights of our cities. It is the monster under the bed, the boogeyman in the closet, the thing that goes bump in the night. But this monster leaves footprints, and this boogeyman can shatter bone. As long as the forests stand, the mystery will remain a dark and terrifying riddle that may never be solved. And perhaps it is better that way, for some things are best left in the dark.